Welcome back to BBC News. Let's turn to our main headlines here. Ukraine's president addresses the UN General Assembly, warning that Russia's Vladimir Putin will keep driving the war wider and deeper unless he's stopped.
And as Russia's war against my country goes on, people are still dying every week. Yet there is no ceasefire because Russia refuses.
The UK Home Secretary orders an urgent review after a BBC investigation finds some asylum seekers are being sent on taxi journeys costing hundreds of pounds.
And now, Jimmy Kimmel.
And Jimmy Kimmel's comeback. The US talk show host returns to TV, calling out anti-American threats to free speech. Let's return to our main story. The Kremlin has today poured scorn on the suggestion from Donald Trump that Ukraine could force Russian forces out of the territory which has been captured since they began their full-scale invasion. The president posted his thoughts on his Truth Social website, saying that with the support of the EU, Ukraine is in a position to fight and win back all of its country in its original form. He said Russia's failure to achieve its objectives was making it look like a paper tiger. But he didn't offer any US help, other than saying that NATO should offer financial support to Ukraine. He's previously called on NATO to buy US weapons and supply them to Kyiv. Well, his comments were raised in the Kremlin's daily media call by our Russia editor Steve Rosenberg. Here are his thoughts on the answers he was given.
Well, on paper at least, there was plenty in Donald Trump's latest comments to rile the Kremlin. For example, his description of Russia as a paper tiger fighting aimlessly in Ukraine. That will have raised some eyebrows in Moscow, I think. I remember when President Obama described Russia as a regional power as opposed to a global power. That was taken as an insult here. But also Donald Trump's suggestion that Ukraine could win back all the territory that Russia has seized. That will have been, will not have gone down well in Moscow. However, the initial response from the Kremlin has been quite a diplomatic one. And perhaps that's not such a surprise, really. We've seen this a lot. So often when Donald Trump comes out with some unexpected criticism of Russia or of Vladimir Putin, the Kremlin takes a deep breath and its response is a little bit calmer, a little bit more diplomatic than you would expect. It's the same this time too. So we've heard from Dmitry Peskov, Vladimir Putin's press secretary, who has said that President Putin values Donald Trump's efforts to resolve the Ukraine conflict. Of course, the whole paper tiger label has been rejected. Mr. Peskov said that Russia isn't a tiger, it is a bear, and paper bears do not exist. He seems to think it's natural that Donald Trump reached the conclusions he did since he just had a conversation with President Zelensky. And he thinks that Russia will have an opportunity to put across its version of events to the US administration. I think there's another reason for the relatively calm reaction of the Kremlin. If you look at Donald Trump's social media post criticizing Russia, there was no talk of new sanctions against Moscow, no ultimatum, no deadline. The Kremlin will have noted that.
Well, that was Steve Rosenberg. Let's speak live to Julianne Smith, who was the American representative to NATO under the Biden administration. She also served as Director for European and NATO Policy at the Department of Defense under President Obama. Thank you so much for being here with us. I know you've been reading the quotes from President Zelensky. You were listening there to Steve Rosenberg. Where do you think we are?
I think, frankly, it's very hard to know exactly where the U.S. is on Ukraine. Over the last 8 months or so, we've seen the president really waver on his position. He has expressed frustration with President Putin at times. He has seemingly grown impatient. He has set deadlines that have come and gone, but he has also expressed immense frustration with President Zelensky. He has talked about Ukraine giving up territory. So the question for us today is, does the tweet that the president put out most recently about Ukraine taking back all of its territory, does that really accurately represent U.S. views and U.S. positions at the moment. I think we're going to need some more time to better understand whether or not the U.S. is shifting or if that was just a spur of the moment thought.
Yes, and what's your reading? Because you posed exactly the right question, because some have described it as a significant shift, but he ends by saying, I wish both countries well. NATO can keep buying weapons from the US and NATO can do what they like with them. That also sounds like potentially he could walk away and leave the warring parties to it, which he has threatened to do in the past.
I think that's the most worrying part of the statement that he issued yesterday. It almost sounded like the United States was preparing to walk away. President Trump has made no secret that he wants to work towards peace in Ukraine, and that is a laudable goal. And I think many of us on the left and the right supported him. But now it almost seems like there won't be any additional summits. There won't be outreach to Moscow or to Kyiv. There will not be additional U.S. assistance provided to Ukraine. And it almost felt like this is being left in Europe's hands, for better or for worse. And I hope that's not the case, because the United States still to this day has an immense amount of leverage and influence over the situation in Ukraine. And I think if the President Trump were to pressure Moscow, he might actually be able to move the needle and move Ukraine closer to peace.
The difficulty is he has leverage, but he's not chosen to use it. In terms of secondary sanctions, we know that could make a difference. Endlessly, we've had over recent months, 2 weeks' time, I'll decide, 2 weeks' time, 2 weeks' time. So you had that continued delay. Now there is a new hurdle he is throwing up, saying that actually before secondary sanctions, he wants the EU to stop buying Russian oil and gas, particularly Hungary and Slovakia. So there's a new hurdle now, isn't there?
Yes, this has been a recent addition in the list of conditions that would have to be met for the United States to use sanctions to apply maximum pressure on Moscow. But it is in many ways an unrealistic ask. It would be extraordinarily difficult, in my view, to get both Hungary and Slovakia to cut off all Russian oil and gas. Perhaps if the president were directly engaged, he could work hand in glove with the European Union and see what they might do together. But again, this feels like the president is handing off the responsibility to Europe. The onus is no longer on the United States to provide a way out of this and apply pressure on Moscow. And it feels to me like he wants to hand this off to someone, whether that's the NATO Secretary General, whether that's the EU's Ursula von der Leyen, or whether or not that's individual leaders in Europe remain to be seen. But again, I believe that if the president were to apply U.S. pressure on Moscow through sanctions, then we could perhaps see Putin come to the table in a more constructive way.
And many people agree with you on that assessment. But if you're also right on the assessment that maybe we also could be seeing the beginnings of the US handing this off, the phrase that you use, if that were to be the case, and we heard President Zelensky talking about the wider threats, not just to Ukraine in that speech, how dangerous would that be then if the US hands this off to others?
Well, look, I don't think this can be resolved without U.S. engagement. The United States needs to be the one working hand in glove with Moscow, with Kyiv, and with European allies to pursue a ceasefire. I'm not absolutely convinced that this is something that either Kyiv can do on its own or individual capitals in Europe can do on their own. Certainly, I appreciate the fact that European governments are providing more military assistance and economic assistance to Ukraine. Those are all important contributions, particularly in light of the fact that the United States is no longer providing military assistance. But to really get to the end state here, and that is to a ceasefire, I believe the U.S. needs to be leading here, leading a coalition of countries together to work towards peace at the end of the day.
Julianne Smith, we have to leave it there, but great to have you on the programme. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now here, the Home Secretary has ordered an urgent review into the use of taxis to transport asylum seekers. The move by Shabana Mahmood follows a BBC investigation that found some migrants were having to travel long distances from their hotels to health appointments and back, sometimes costing hundreds of pounds. Well, Philip Norton has the latest.
It was this video, as part of a BBC investigation, which put the government's use of taxis for asylum seekers in the spotlight. File on 4 found they're being used routinely to get asylum seekers to medical appointments. In this case, a 500-mile round trip to hospital. The taxi driver told the passenger the fare of £600 would be billed to the Home Office. Today, the Home Secretary has ordered an urgent review in light of the investigation. Speaking on Radio 4's Today programme, the Work and Pensions Secretary Pat McFadden said he understood the concern.
When I heard your report on this yesterday, I'm not surprised that that was a feature that caught people's eye, and the Home Office are looking at that, and I think they should look at it. And I think a lot of your listeners will quite rightly ask, why should people be taken around in taxis?
It comes as public scrutiny of the costs of asylum seekers is at its highest. The latest government figures show in the past year there were more asylum seekers than ever in the country, 111,000. That's 14% higher than last year. Currently, just over 32,000 asylum seekers are being housed in hotels at an estimated cost to the taxpayer of £5.7 million a day. The overall annual cost to the country relating to asylum is said to be £4.76 billion, down £500 million from last year. But after a Freedom of Information request by the BBC, the government said it doesn't keep any records for how much of that is spent on taxes. Asylum seekers are issued with a bus pass for one return journey per week, but the investigation found taxis are called for other necessary travel. After weeks of protests outside a number of hotels housing asylum seekers, the cost of taxi fares will now be adding to the inbox for the newly appointed Home Secretary. Philip Norton, BBC News.
Well, let's go to Westminster and our political correspondent David Cornock. And David, what's your reading? Because it didn't take long, did it, for the new Home Secretary to order this review just hours after that BBC investigation and the details?
Yeah, Shabana Mahmood, who was just appointed to the Home Office a week or so ago, seemed as surprised as the rest of us, I think, by the cost of that taxi journey, in particular that one that involved an asylum seeker going to a doctor somewhere he used to live at a cost to the taxpayer of £600. Now, the Home Office is stressing that these contracts do mean that the cost of individual vehicles is decided by suppliers, and they are paid on a per person per mile basis. So often you have contractors operating the hotels, and then the contracts are subcontracted for the transport operations to taxi companies. But that can be very expensive, as we've seen. We've looked at one contract here at the BBC for one of the suppliers, and they're spending about £344,000 a month on taxis. So a little surprised that the government wants to look at that, and it's a gift, of course, to the government's political opponents who think that ministers have not been doing enough to tackle the cost to the public purse of asylum seekers.
David Cornock there, live for us at Westminster. Thanks very much for that. Thank you. And just a reminder, you can listen to that full report. File on 4 investigates inside the migrant hotel. It is on BBC Sounds now. Around the world and across the UK, you are watching BBC News. Welcome back to BBC News. Now, every household in England, Wales and Scotland will be offered a lower standing charge deal by the end of January under the plans from the industry regulator. At the moment, the charges are standardised regardless of use, and critics say that's unfair for low energy households. Charities have welcomed the shift but warn the move could cause more confusion and won't necessarily bring down bills. Our cost of living correspondent Kevin Peachy has this report.
Standing charges, crucial to keep the energy network running and secure, fixed as a daily charge for gas and electricity, but among some, frustrating because they can't be cut by reducing your energy use. And they're getting more expensive. Next week, the gas standing charge will rise to more than 34p a day. For electricity, the daily fee is going up to nearly 54p a day, but charges vary by region. In North Wales and Merseyside, the electricity standing charge will be nearly 70p a day. Ofgem's latest plan would see all suppliers offering at least one tariff in which these fees are lower, but customers will pay more for each unit of energy.
Whether that's the right tariff for somebody will depend on their individual circumstances. So I would say to people, if you are interested in getting more control over your bill and you are perhaps a low energy user who want to see a greater link between perhaps safely reducing your energy and the amount that you pay, then have a look at these tariffs, talk to your supplier and get some advice to see whether this is the right thing for you.
These new tariffs will be available by the end of January, the coldest time of year. But charities and campaigners say people struggling to pay their bills in freezing homes is a bigger concern.
They could have reduced standing charges. There are lots of excess costs, profits and levies in the standing charge. But instead of doing that, they've hidden the standing charge within the unit cost. So it's going to leave vulnerable consumers still unable to pay for heat this winter.
And the trade body for suppliers says the proposals are misplaced.
This isn't what we would be thinking to do if we wanted to help people with the cost of energy now. I think what I would really like to see is Ofgem working with government on targeted support for people who need it most. Energy is an essential service, and we really need to get help to people who are least able to use less energy or use it differently.
With the changes being of limited benefit to customers during a tough winter, this plan has already received a cool response. Kevin Peachy, BBC News.
Now, an independent report has found significant concerns with how the Police Service of Northern Ireland used journalists' phone numbers to check for any leaks of information by its officers or staff. The force commissioned the review following a court case last year which found that police had unlawfully spied on 2 journalists from Belfast. Here's our Ireland correspondent, Chris Page.
Well, this report goes to the heart of a very complex and often controversial issue. How should the police use their powers, described in the review as intrusive, to access people's phone data without their permission? It started last year when there was a court case involving 2 journalists from Belfast, Trevor Burney and Barry McCaffrey. It was found that they'd been unlawfully spied on by the Police Service of Northern Ireland. Concerns were raised that this could have been common practice. So the PSNI commissioned a review by the barrister from London, Angus McCulloch, KC. He has found no basis for the concerns that surveillance of journalists was widespread or systemic, but he has made criticisms too. In particular, firstly, in 4 years from 2011, the Police Service of Northern Ireland accessed the communications data of 8 journalists to try to find out who their confidential sources were, and Mr McCulloch said he considered that to be unlawful. Secondly, he criticised something called defensive operations. This is where the police took journalists' phone numbers that they'd been given voluntarily to the press office, for example, and cross-checked them against police phone records to see if any officers or staff who weren't authorised to talk to the media had indeed been doing so. He said that was disproportionate and unnecessary. In the news conference in the last hour, the Chief Constable John Boucher has said the PSNI is going to improve its practices.
Sunlight truly is the best disinfectant. It ensures we improve where we need to. This comprehensive report sets out that no evidence exists of the abuse of those powers by the PSNI, but that our processes in the application of these powers needs to improve, and that, I can assure you, will happen.
In response, Amnesty International and the National Union of Journalists have said they think there now needs to be a full public inquiry into surveillance of journalists by the police and also by the security service MI5.
That was our Ireland correspondent Chris Page. Now, the Mayor of London today described President Trump as racist and sexist. He was asked about comments made by the US President at the UN, where he told the General Assembly yesterday, "I look at London, where you have a terrible mayor, and now they want Sharia law." Well, this was the Mayor's response.
Look, I think people are wondering what it is about this Muslim mayor who leads a liberal, multicultural, progressive, successful city that means I appear to be living rent-free inside Donald Trump's head.
Are those comments Islamophobic?
Listen, when people say things, when people act in a certain way, when people behave in a certain way, you've got to believe them.
So you're saying he is Islamophobic?
I think President Trump has shown he is racist, he is sexist, he is misogynistic, and he's Islamophobic.
Well, that was Sadiq Khan talking a little earlier. Now, the US comedian Jimmy Kimmel has returned to his talk show days after being suspended for comments he made about the killing of the conservative activist Charlie Kirk. Visibly emotional, Mr. Kimmel said he had never been his intention to make light of the murder of a young man. Donald Trump has reacted with fury at the decision to bring the show back. Here's Peter Bowes.
Back on the air, an emotional Jimmy Kimmel returning to late-night television almost a week after he was suspended indefinitely.
I've been hearing a lot about what I need to say and do tonight, and the truth is, I don't think what I have to say is going to make much of a difference. If you like me, you like me. If you don't, you don't. I have no illusions about changing anyone's mind. But I do want to make something clear because it's important to me as a human, and that is, you understand that it was never my intention to make light of the murder of a young man. I don't think there's anything funny about it.
He talked about watching the memorial service for Charlie Kirk and the comments from his widow.
It's a very beautiful moment. I don't know if you saw this. On Sunday, Erica Kirk forgave the man who shot her husband. She forgave him. That is an example we should follow.
The comedian's bosses at ABC, which is owned by Disney, pulled the plug on his show after America's broadcasting regulator, the Federal Communications Commission, threatened action over Kimmel's comments last Monday about the assassination of Charlie Kirk.
We hit some new lows over the weekend with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them and doing everything they can to score political points from it.
There was a huge backlash to Kimmel's suspension. Fellow comedians rallied to his defence, calling it an attack on free speech. Hollywood Union members took to the streets to protest, while some Americans said they'd cancelled their subscriptions to Disney's streaming service. But as suddenly as he was taken off the air, Disney announced on Monday that Kimmel was coming back, saying it suspended the show because it felt some of his comments had been ill-timed and insensitive. As he returned to the air, the comedian acknowledged that some of what he'd said was ill-timed. But defiantly, he added this.
This show is not important. What is important is that we get to live in a country that allows us to have a show like this.
Breaking news.
Kimmel isn't back on every TV screen. Two of the country's biggest owners of local stations say they'll continue to keep him off the air. Shortly before the show, Donald Trump posted on social media that he couldn't believe ABC had given Jimmy Kimmel his job back. He asks, why would they want someone back who does so poorly, who's not funny?
Jimmy Kimmel is
Tensions remain between America's broadcasters, the authorities that oversee them, and a president many fear is trying to silence them. Peter Bowes, BBC News, Los Angeles.
Well, before we take a break, I want to go back to NASA headquarters in Houston, where the crew of Artemis 2, they're still giving a news conference, that mission to go back to the moon, eventually develop a base there. They're taking questions, so let's put the sound up.
On va utiliser une et deux fenêtres qui va être fixées sur la Lune et on va partager, on va prendre des photos, des observations. On va aussi capturer le moment avec
Well, The question was in French, and so the astronaut answering in French as well. Those 4 astronauts who've been selected, just talking there to journalists. It's worth pointing out that's been going on for about half an hour, 40 minutes. Do head to the BBC website because you can find a stream of that news conference. It is fascinating. There's so much interest about the mission itself and actually what they hope to do there. Not just get to the moon, but actually develop a base for further exploration. Of course, Mars ultimately one of the objectives. So do head to the website and you can see more of that news conference. I'll be back with more headlines. We'll be live at the UN. We'll also have more reaction to that successful treatment for Huntington's disease. We'll talk to one of the lead researchers live here on the programme in the next hour or so. All of that, it's coming up here on BBC News.
This is BBC News Live from the United Nations in New York. I'm Katrina Perry.
And I'm Matthew Amrody-Waller here in London.
Ukraine's president addresses the United Nations General Assembly, warning that Russia's Putin will keep driving the war wider and deeper unless he's stopped.
Stopping Putin now is cheaper than trying to protect every port and every ship from terrorists with sea drones.
Our other main headlines here. A major breakthrough in the treatment of Huntington's disease. For the first time, a gene therapy has been shown to slow its progression. We speak to a man living with the condition for 20 years. Overwhelmed and on the brink of collapse, we speak to some of the doctors at Gaza City's last functioning hospital. And the UK Home Secretary orders an urgent review after a BBC investigation finds some asylum seekers are being sent on taxi journeys costing hundreds of pounds.
Hello, you're very welcome to the United Nations headquarters here in New York, where the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has been addressing the General Assembly, telling them that his country is living through what he called the most destructive arms race in human history. He warned nations gathered here that the President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, wants to continue the war by expanding it. He was speaking, of course, just a day after the US President Donald Trump flagged what appears to be a marked change of his tone. He posted on social media to say, "I think Ukraine, with the support of the European Union, is in a position to fight and win all of Ukraine back in its original form." Well, we'll analyse all of those developments in a moment. But first, let's have a little listen back to some of what Volodymyr Zelensky said earlier.
The facts are simple. Stopping this war now, and with it, the global arms race, is cheaper than building underground kindergartens or massive bunkers for critical infrastructure later. Stopping Putin now is cheaper than trying to protect every port and every ship from terrorists with sea drones. Stopping Russia now is cheaper than wondering who will be the first to create a simple drone carrying a nuclear warhead. So we must use everything we have together to force the aggressor to stop. And only then do we have a real chance that this arms race will not end in catastrophe for all of us. If it takes weapons to do it, if it takes pressure on Russia, then it must be done. And it must be done now. Otherwise, Putin will keep driving the war forward wider and deeper. And we told you before, Ukraine is only the first, and now Russian drones are already flying across Europe, and Russian operations are already spreading across countries, and Putin wants to continue this war by expanding it, and no one can feel safe right now.
Katrina, fascinating listening to that. All of it comes, of course, in the wake of Donald Trump's post on social media and people trying to figure out what he actually means. It's always important to actually follow his actions, not words, but people trying to work out if it's a significant shift or perhaps the beginnings of Donald Trump perhaps walking away, leaving the warring parties to it.
It could potentially be a bit of both, Matthew, actually, because if we think back just a few months ago, President Trump was talking about, possibly the best outcome here for Ukraine was a ceasefire and things would stay as they are, with the Russian-occupied territory ceding to Russia, essentially. Obviously completely unacceptable to the Ukrainians, but that's where President Trump was. Now, after that meeting he had with President Zelensky here, we have this Truth Social post where he seems to now be saying Ukraine could be the winner here. And we know how much President Trump likes winners. But it could also, the key phrase for me in that Truth Social post is when he says Ukraine with the cooperation of the European Union. It doesn't say, and our support or our help or US security or anything like that. So that's a little bit of a tell. Also in his speech here yesterday, President Trump said, as he has said in the past, there's a whole ocean between this conflict and my country. This has nothing to do with the United States. You know, we're kind of doing it for the good of the world in a way. So I think it was really important and interesting that President Zelensky in his speech was trying to paint this as a much, much broader issue, that this is an issue that the whole world should be concerned about Russia's progress. But also when he gave that lengthy speech about the modern arms race, the involvement in AI, that drones don't see borders and essentially could be used on other nations in the future. But the other issue we're following along here at the United Nations today, of course, as we have been all week, is the issue of Gaza. We've seen so many countries recognise the state of Palestine, but the humanitarian crisis in Gaza has really been front and centre at this assembly, with calls for an immediate ceasefire by the United Nations Secretary General, among other leaders, in a landscape of urgency for action which has seen nearly a dozen countries, including France, the UK and Canada, formally announcing a recognition of Palestinian statehood. And our colleague John Donison is in the region at the moment. He has been hearing from doctors who are telling him they're overrun by the depth of the injuries and the casualties that they're having to deal with in hospitals that are just not fit for purpose, those that are standing at this point, which, as we know, is very, very few. So John Donison has sent us this report from the Israel-Gaza border, and just a warning that you may find some of the details in his report distressing.
This is what's left of the last functioning hospital in Gaza City. Barely functioning, with the war raging outside. Inside Al-Shifa, many of the beds don't even have mattresses. The casualties are endless. This is 13-year-old Mohammed. He's now partially paralysed after being hit by an Israeli strike. Treating him are volunteer Australian doctors Saya Aziz and Nada Abu Ayoub.
It's just a mass murder, a killing, a torture, a nightmare. I don't know.
Israel does not allow international journalists uncontrolled access to Gaza, but we managed to speak to them from just across the border.
We did operations with hardly to minimal to hardly no anesthesia.
So the patients are in agony?
Yes, of course, yes, and there's no painkillers as well. With their limb hanging with a piece of skin and the tendon, brain matter out. Abdomen organs are out. It's horrific.
Last week, the team say they had to give a cesarean to a 9-month pregnant woman who had had her head blown off. They managed to save the baby.
Literally every couple of hours, there's multiple amputation cases where massive resuscitation is life or limb, literally. And you go in and you're trying to anaesthetize him. They're swatting flies in theatre.
But there's endless work to be done. Outside, Israel's tanks are advancing. They're now just 500 metres from the hospital as the ground offensive against Hamas continues. From Israel, you can see and hear the war. People here at a special viewing point can pay to watch it unfold on a long lens.
Gaza City is just a few miles away, but it's a world apart. And as Israel's operation continues, it's being pounded. The airstrikes can be heard from as far as 50 miles away.
And almost 2 years into this war, the two sides seem as distanced as ever, and both with entirely different perspectives. John Donison, BBC News, on the Gaza-Israel border.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about some of the issues that John raised in his report there. I'm joined here in New York by Tom Fletcher. He's Under Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator. Tom, thanks for being with us. Horrific scenes in Gaza there, as we have been seeing for years now at this point. You've been to that hospital. How bad are things as you've seen it?
So I was there in February, and things even then were utterly gruesome at Al-Shifa. You know, I met doctors who were amputating the limbs of children without anaesthetic. I met people who were just working round the clock to try and keep people alive who'd been shot by snipers. We found bodies in shallow graves. I actually donated blood at Al-Shifa because they were having a blood shortage at the time. It's utterly grim, and it's the humiliation and devastation that is now happening, of course, all over Gaza.
The doctors there talking about having no supplies, being under constant attack. Israel has said that it is letting some supplies in, or at least says it is. What's your experience of what's getting in and what's being stopped?
So I see the ledger every morning of what we're being allowed to get in and what we're not being allowed to get in. And it's a little bit more than it was a month ago, but it is an absolute drop in the ocean. And we face these bureaucratic hurdles, these restrictions. We're often directed straight into the crowds of desperate, hungry looters. So our job is being made very, very difficult. And, you know, take something like peanut butter. So we know that these kids in Al-Shifa and elsewhere, their bodies are consuming their own organs. And so the first thing we tried to get to them is this peanut butter paste that just helps that to stop that happening. And we're now told that's a luxury and we can't bring in this peanut butter taste. Peanut butter as a luxury. We will try and save as many kids inside Gaza as we can, but the conditions are horrific and we're not being allowed to do our work in the way that we need to.
And what reason is Israel giving to the United Nations for stopping that peanut butter paste, for stopping the anaesthetics?
They will say they don't want any risk of peanut butter, anaesthetics, whatever we're trying to bring in, reaching Hamas. Now, we have the networks, we have the routes, we do this all over the world. This is what we do everywhere. We know how to do this at scale without it reaching Hamas. We need to get 500, 600 trucks in a day. We've got those supplies on the border just piling up. And that is all meters away from a man-made famine and all that means for these kids in Gaza and for the population in Gaza.
We're listening to speaker after speaker, with some notable exceptions, President Trump being one yesterday, saying the world cannot stand by and watch what's happening to these children. But yet, in many ways, it would seem like the world is standing by, and President Zelensky made that point himself. Why is this institution, all the powerful people that are in there today, failing to help those kids?
So I'm just going from here to a meeting with President Zelensky, and he's been speaking out very powerfully on that front. You know, look, amid all the fireworks and drama of President Trump's speech yesterday, I heard him say very clearly that he wants a ceasefire in Gaza, and he wants to see other peace processes succeed. So there's something practical we can work with there. He also said later, in a very good meeting with the Secretary General, he's 100% behind the UN. So we need to now use that momentum, use that practical engagement to actually cut through. For us, as humanitarians, we can save 114 million lives next year, but what we need is the politics to get better. We need people to actually work together to end some of these conflicts. We need access. We need to bust through those checkpoints, bust through those obstacles we face, and then we need funding. We're about 20% funded across all of our appeals at the moment, so we're doing this amid devastating, brutal life and death choices over funding cuts.
The Secretary General spoke yesterday about nations who are deliberately flouting humanitarian law and humanitarian rules. Would it appear to you that that is the case with Israel? I mean, he has said that. We're hearing an aid flotilla trying to make its way to Gaza, came under a drone attack last night.
Oh, there's no doubt there are clear breaches of international law, but not just with Israel. Actually, we're seeing this globally. Last year was the deadliest year on record to be a humanitarian worker. We lost hundreds of our colleagues. I have to make the calls to their families, and they ask me, will there be justice? Will there be accountability? And I'm not sure I can tell them there will be, because we're just not seeing the people who are firing the bullets, who are providing the guns, who are giving the commands, being held to account for what they're doing to us and our community and the people we serve.
There's a lot of focus on Gaza at this conference. We haven't yet heard much about Sudan, which also is just another place. It's not just Gaza and Sudan, obviously, but Sudan in particular, there is a horrific situation there as well.
Well, thank you so much for bringing that into the conversation, because it's the big one. 30 million people need our help right now. I have 2 significant meetings today on Sudan with different coalitions of partners, including from the region, to try to work out how we get a ceasefire, how we get the access we need, including to Al-Fasher, which is under siege right now, tens of thousands of people needing our help that we can't reach, how we get support into Darfur, where I went in my very first week in the job, into the Kordofans. We're seeing cholera, we're seeing starvation. Desperate, desperate needs. And again, we need the politics to work, we need the access, and we need the money.
Just briefly, do you have hope that these things can reach the people in need?
I have to have hope. I have to be the last person in the room who keeps hope. And this week, actually, amid all the drama and the kind of knockabout, kind of Technicolor theatre, it does bring me hope, because actually people are coming together and there is energy in the building. There is a sense of vigor behind many of these peace processes. There is a sense that we've got to put our differences aside and work together, and that's why we were invented. We weren't invented for the good times. We were invented for times like this.
Okay, Tom Fletcher, thank you very much for joining us here on BBC News. Plenty more is still to come. Do stay with us. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.
Welcome back to today's Verified Live. Now, researchers say they've successfully treated one of the cruelest and most devastating diseases, Huntington's, for the first time. It runs through families, relentlessly kills brain cells, and resembles a combination of dementia, Parkinson's and motor neurone disease. Our medical editor, Fergus Walsh, has the story.
Jack May Davis knows that without treatment, he is guaranteed to develop the same relentless condition as killed his father, Huntington's disease. Caused by a faulty gene, it destroys brain cells and affects the whole body. Jack's father, Fred, first developed symptoms in his late 30s and eventually needed round-the-clock care. He died aged 54.
Yeah, it was really, really awful and just horrible to see. And horrible to know as well that could be, or, you know, would be me at some point.
So, Lucy, if you look here, you can see...
But now there is hope. A trial of a gene therapy slowed the progression of Huntington's disease by 75% over 3 years. Scientists involved in the research at University College London described the results as spectacular.
I am absolutely thrilled and excited that we now have a potential treatment for this truly devastating disorder. And what the data means is that for a person who has Huntington's disease, they will be able to maintain their function longer. They'll be able to stay and work longer. They'll be able to support their families longer. They'll be able to be independent. So it will give them more years of living a good quality of life.
Here you can see the gene therapy being injected deep into the brain of one of the 29 patients on the trial. The surgery takes more than 12 hours, but is a one-off treatment. The drug, called AMT-130, enters cells in the brain, releasing its genetic material. This lowers levels of a toxic protein and slows progress of the disease. This gene therapy represents a stunning breakthrough in Huntington's disease. It is rare to see such dramatic and convincing results from any medical trial, and there is hope that this experimental treatment will be licensed perhaps as soon as next year.
And so here is a picture of your brain, which I'm pleased to tell you looks fantastic.
Jack, who's 30, is part of a Huntington's research group in London. The team hope that patients like him could eventually be given the treatment to prevent them ever falling ill. Has it in some ways lifted some of the shadow of this disease from you?
Yeah, it does make the future seem a little bit brighter, but it's definitely going to help. You know, definitely going to help with knowing that I have got more time here than perhaps I first thought.
If approved, the drug is certain to be very expensive. Another gene therapy costs over £2 million. But for researchers and for Huntington disease families, this is the breakthrough they have dreamed of for years. Fergus Walsh, BBC News.
Well, with me here in the studio is Charles Sabine, who was tested positive for Huntington's in 2005 and has since worked to raise awareness and support for scientific research into the disease. And Charles, thank you so much for being here with me. I wonder if you would start by just describing for people who are watching just how prevalent Huntington's has been in terms of your wider family.
Everyone in my family who could have tested positive for the disease did, and therefore they all died. In other words, my father, uncle, and my brother all died with the disease. So it's actually a 50-50 chance, supposedly, but it always seems to be worse than that. And it certainly was in my family. There was no one who tested negative. So it has been devastating for my family, as it has for so many other hidden families around the world. Now, I say hidden because so many of these families hide the disease because of a horrible history of shame and stigma that's gone back centuries now.
Which is why you do so much public speaking. I want to put onto the screen a picture of you and your brother, John. It must have been devastating, though, when you tested positive, given everything you had actually witnessed at close quarters with the family.
Well, with my father to start with, and then my brother, yes, it has always been a hideous conveyor belt for Huntington's families, in that you see your loved one going through the devastating symptoms of this disease, which amount to a combination of Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and cancer. So it's a horrible, slow disease, which you see knowing that you will probably have the same fate until now.
That is quite something to have to live with. Just briefly on this point, in terms of your symptoms, I said in the introduction 20 years ago is when you had the test.
Yes.
Where are you now?
I'm in the early stages of the disease. It's a very complicated disease. It's one which manifests itself in the later stages